The wind didn't care that it was only October. It ripped through Blackstone Ridge like something alive and angry, tearing shutters off buildings, hurling dust and ice against windows, sending people scrambling for cover. The blizzard came early that year, earlier than anyone expected, and it came with the kind of cold that made your bones ache just standing still. Evelyn Mercer sat on the courthouse steps and watched the town disappear into white. She didn't move. Not when the snow started piling up around her boots. Not when the temperature dropped so low her fingers went numb inside her gloves. Not when the last few stragglers hurried past without looking at her, heads down, collars up, pretending they didn't see. They saw. They always saw. Evelyn was the kind of woman people noticed even when they pretended not to. Too tall. Too broad. Too loud when she laughed. Too sharp when she spoke. Too much of everything the town decided a woman shouldn't be. For 32 years, she'd carried the weight of their judgment like a second skin, and for 32 years, she'd survived it. But today, something broke. Her husband was dead. Thomas Mercer had collapsed in the grain mill 3 days ago, clutching his chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come. By the time someone thought to fetch the doctor, it was already over. Heart failure, they said. Quick and clean. Nothing about it felt clean. Thomas had been a good man in the ways that mattered. Kind, patient, steady. He never raised his voice, never raised his hand. He worked hard, came home tired, and fell asleep most nights before finishing his supper. They'd been married 11 years, and in all that time, he'd never once made her feel small. But he'd also never made much money. And in a town like Blackstone Ridge, that was the only thing people remembered. The debts started piling up the moment Thomas stopped breathing. Debts Evelyn didn't even know existed. Loans he'd taken out to keep the house. Money borrowed to fix the roof after the hailstorm 2 summers back. Interest that doubled, then tripled, while Thomas worked himself to death trying to stay ahead of it. She'd stood in the courthouse that morning with her hands folded, listening to a judge she'd never met read numbers that didn't make sense. The house was gone. The furniture was gone. Everything Thomas had worked for, everything they'd built together, gone. Seized, auctioned, sold to cover debts she couldn't pay. And the whole town turned out to watch. Not because they cared, because they wanted to see her fall. Evelyn had felt their eyes on her the entire time. Women in fine dresses whispering behind gloved hands. Men in clean suits shaking their heads like her poverty was contagious. Even the judge had looked at her with something close to pity, which was worse than contempt because pity meant they'd already decided she was beaten. She wasn't beaten. She was furious. But fury didn't pay debts. So she'd walked out of that courtroom with her head high, carrying a battered leather bag that used to belong to Thomas's mother, and she'd sat down on the steps to figure out what came next. The snow kept falling. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and stared at the street. The blizzard was already erasing everything. Footprints, wagon tracks, the clear line between road and sidewalk. In another hour, the whole town would be buried. She should move, find shelter, find warmth, find somewhere to sleep tonight that wasn't a snowbank. But where? She had $11 in her pocket, no family, no friends close enough to ask for help without feeling like a burden. The boarding house charged $2 a night, and Mrs. Pritchard had made it clear years ago that women like Evelyn weren't welcome there anyway. Too disruptive, she'd said. Translation, too fat, too poor, too much trouble. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the wind bite her face. Maybe she'd just sit here until the cold took her. Maybe that was easier than starting over with nothing. Maybe, you planning to freeze to death, or are you just stubborn? Evelyn's eyes snapped open. A man stood at the bottom of the steps, snow already gathering on his hat and shoulders. Tall, lean, weathered in the way men got when they spent more time outside than in. His face was hard, all sharp angles and tight lines, but his eyes weren't cruel, just tired. I'm thinking, Evelyn said. Think faster. Storm's getting worse. I'll manage. The man studied her for a long moment, then climbed the steps and sat down beside her without asking permission. He didn't look at her, just stared out at the blizzard like he had all the time in the world. You're Evelyn Mercer, he said. It wasn't a question. Was, Evelyn said. Don't know what I am now. You're the woman who buried her husband 3 days ago and lost everything this morning. Evelyn turned to look at him. You keeping track? Small town. People talk. People always talk. The man nodded slowly. Name's Caleb Thorne. I run a cattle ranch north of the valley, about 12 miles out. Evelyn frowned. She'd heard the name before. Thorne. The man whose wife died 2 years ago. The one raising 3 daughters alone out in the middle of nowhere. So far from town, most people forgot he existed. Condolences, Evelyn said carefully. I heard about your wife. Caleb's jaw tightened. Heard about your husband, too. They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by grief they didn't know how to talk about. Then Caleb spoke again. I need a housekeeper. Evelyn blinked. Excuse me? Housekeeper, Caleb repeated. Someone to cook, clean, manage the house. Help with the girls when I'm working. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm hiring. Evelyn let out a short, bitter laugh. You don't know me. Don't need to. You don't know what kind of worker I am, what kind of person I am. I know you're sitting in a blizzard with nowhere to go, Caleb said bluntly, and I know every woman I've hired in the last 2 years has quit within a month. Maybe you're a terrible boss. Maybe I am. He finally looked at her. But you're out of options, and I'm out of time. So here's the deal. Room, board, and $20 a month. You work hard, keep the house running, don't cause trouble. That's it. Evelyn stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. Why me? Caleb stood, brushing snow off his coat. Because you're desperate, and desperate people don't quit easy. He adjusted his hat. Wagons around the corner. Leaving in 10 minutes. You're welcome to come. Or you can sit here and freeze. Your choice. He walked away without looking back. Evelyn sat there, heart pounding, mind racing. This was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know his ranch, his daughters, his life. For all she knew, he was dangerous. For all she knew, this was a mistake that would get her killed. Or worse. But what was the alternative? Freeze on these steps? Beg for charity from people who'd spent years treating her like dirt? Wander into the storm with $11 and hope for a miracle? Evelyn looked down at the leather bag in her lap. Everything she owned. Everything she had left. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She stood up. Her legs were stiff from the cold, her hands shaking, her whole body screaming at her to find warmth. But she ignored all of it and started walking, boots crunching through fresh snow, following the path Caleb Thorne had taken. The wagon was exactly where he said it would be. Caleb was already sitting in the driver's seat, reins in hand, staring straight ahead. He didn't react when Evelyn climbed up beside him, didn't ask if she was sure, didn't say anything at all. He just clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. Evelyn didn't look back at the town. There was nothing left to see. The ranch was worse than she expected. They rode in silence for over an hour, the blizzard swallowing the world around them until there was nothing but white and wind and the steady creak of the wagon wheels. Evelyn kept her head down, arms wrapped tight around herself, trying not to think about how cold she was or how insane this decision might be. By the time they reached the property, the sun was gone. The ranch sat in a shallow valley surrounded by low hills and scraggly trees bent sideways from years of wind. The house itself was larger than Evelyn expected. 2 stories, wood frame with a sagging porch and shutters that rattled in the storm. There were outbuildings scattered around the property. A barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, a storage shed. Everything looked tired. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down without a word. Evelyn followed, grabbing her bag and nearly slipping on the icy ground. Her fingers were so numb she could barely grip the handle. This way, Caleb said, heading for the front door. Evelyn hurried after him, boots sliding, snow stinging her face. The inside of the house was dark. No lamps lit, no fire in the hearth. Just cold, stale air and the faint smell of something burnt. Caleb struck a match and lit a lantern on the table. The light flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Evelyn looked around slowly. The main room was a disaster. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were piled in the sink, crusty and unwashed. The floor was tracked with mud and straw. Laundry sat in a heap near the door, half frozen and forgotten. The air smelled like mildew and neglect. It looked like no one had cleaned in months. Girls are upstairs, Caleb said, setting the lantern down. Sadie's 15, June's 11. Millie's 6. He paused. They're not easy. Easy how? Evelyn asked. They don't trust strangers, and they've run off every housekeeper I've hired. How? Caleb's expression darkened. You'll find out. He crossed to the stairs and called up, voice sharp. Girls, get down here. Silence. Then slowly, footsteps. 3 girls appeared at the top of the stairs, shadows against the dim light. The oldest came down first. Sadie. She was tall for 15, all sharp edges and hard eyes. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled and unwashed. She wore a dress 2 sizes too small, patched at the elbows, muddy at the hem. But it was her expression that hit Evelyn hardest. Pure hatred. Sadie looked at Evelyn the way someone looked at a rat in the grain bin. This the new one? Sadie asked, voice flat. Her name's Evelyn, Caleb said. She's staying. They all stay, Sadie said. For about a week. The second girl descended slowly. June. 11 years old, thin as a rail, with pale skin and enormous eyes that looked too sad for a child. She didn't say anything, didn't even look at Evelyn, just stood behind her sister like she was trying to disappear. The youngest came last. Millie, 6 years old, barefoot, clutching a filthy rag doll. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair knotted into clumps. She stared at Evelyn with wide, curious eyes. You're big, Millie said. Millie, Caleb snapped. She is, though, Millie insisted. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She'd heard worse, heard it her whole life. But hearing it from a 6-year-old somehow made it sharper. I am, Evelyn said evenly. Always have been. Millie tilted her head. Why? Millie, that's enough, Caleb said. But Evelyn crouched down, meeting the girl's eyes. Because that's how I was made. Same reason you're small, same reason your sister's tall. We all get what we get. Millie thought about that. Okay, Sadie snorted. Real inspiring. Evelyn stood slowly, ignoring the ache in her knees. Your father hired me to keep this house running. That's what I'm going to do. Good luck, Sadie said coldly. Last woman lasted 4 days. What happened? Sadie smiled. She left. Why? Because I made her. The room went silent. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't correct her. Didn't defend Evelyn. Didn't do anything except stand there looking exhausted. Evelyn met Sadie's eyes and didn't flinch. I'm not her, Evelyn said quietly. We'll see, Sadie shot back. Then she turned and walked back upstairs without another word. June followed like a ghost. Millie lingered for a moment, staring at Evelyn with that strange, curious expression, then scurried after her sisters. The house fell silent again. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. I'll show you your room. He led her down a narrow hallway off the kitchen to a small room at the back of the house. It was barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. The walls were bare. The window was cracked. But it was warm, and it was dry, and it was hers. Get settled, Caleb said. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. What about supper? Evelyn asked. Caleb paused. There's bread in the pantry, maybe some cheese. Girls usually fend for themselves. Then he left. Evelyn stood alone in the tiny room and set her bag on the bed. Her hands were still shaking, not from the cold anymore, from everything. She sat down slowly, springs creaking under her weight, and stared at the cracked window. Outside, the blizzard howled. Inside, the house felt like a tomb. But Evelyn didn't cry. She'd survived worse. And tomorrow, she'd start figuring out how to survive this. The first night was hell. Evelyn didn't sleep. The bed was lumpy, the blanket too thin, and every time she closed her eyes, she heard Thomas's voice in her head, asking her what the hell she thought she was doing out here in the middle of nowhere with a man she didn't know and 3 girls who hated her. She didn't have an answer. When dawn finally came, pale and gray through the cracked window, Evelyn forced herself out of bed and got dressed. Her body ached, her head pounded. But she moved anyway, pulling on her worn dress, lacing her boots, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth. Then she walked into the kitchen and stopped cold. It was worse than she remembered. Dishes were stacked everywhere, crusted with food, crawling with flies. The floor was sticky. The stove was coated in grease. There were mouse droppings in the corners and something that might have been bread rotting in a pan on the counter. Evelyn closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with the dishes. It took over an hour just to scrape off the worst of it. The water in the pump was ice cold, and there was no soap, so she used ash from the stove and scrubbed until her hands were raw. Every plate, every cup, every fork and knife and spoon. Then she moved to the floor, swept, scrubbed, hauled bucket after bucket of dirty water outside and dumped it in the snow. By mid-morning, the kitchen was starting to look like a kitchen again. Evelyn's back screamed in protest. Her knees throbbed. Her hands were cracked and bleeding in places. But she didn't stop. She found flour in the pantry, along with some lard and a jar of ancient yeast. She mixed dough, kneaded it, set it to rise near the stove. While it rested, she cleaned the stove itself, scraping off layers of burnt grease until the iron gleamed. Footsteps creaked overhead. The girls were waking up. Evelyn braced herself. Sadie came down first, moving slow, eyes still heavy with sleep. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and stared at the kitchen. Her expression didn't change. "You're still here," Sadie said. "I'm still here," Evelyn confirmed. "Cleaning won't change anything." "Wasn't trying to change anything, just trying to make breakfast." Sadie crossed her arms. "We don't eat breakfast." "You do now." June appeared behind her sister, silent as always. She looked around the kitchen with wide eyes but didn't say a word. Millie came last, yawning, dragging her filthy doll. "It smells different," she announced. "That's called clean," Evelyn said. Millie wrinkled her nose. "I don't like it." Evelyn almost smiled. "You'll get used to it." She pulled the risen dough out and started shaping it into rolls. The girls watched her in silence, suspicious and wary, like wild animals observing something unfamiliar. Evelyn didn't try to talk to them. She just worked. When the rolls were in the oven, she started frying eggs. She found a bit of ham in the smokehouse, sliced it thin, cooked it crispy. She brewed coffee, real coffee, strong and black, and set the table with plates that were actually clean. The smell filled the house, rich, warm, human. Millie's stomach growled. Sadie glared at her, but when Evelyn set the food on the table and told them to sit, they did. Even Sadie. Evelyn served them each a plate, eggs, ham, fresh rolls with butter. Then she poured herself coffee and sat down at the far end of the table, saying nothing. The girls stared at their food. Millie picked up a roll, sniffed it, then took a tiny bite. Her eyes went wide. "It's good," she whispered. June ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten what real food tasted like. Sadie didn't touch hers. She just sat there, arms crossed, glaring at Evelyn like this was some kind of trick. "You don't have to eat it," Evelyn said calmly, "but it's there if you want it." "I don't want it," Sadie said. "Fine." They sat in silence. Then, after a long moment, Sadie grabbed a roll and bit into it with enough force to tear it apart. She chewed slowly, swallowed, then took another bite. Evelyn said nothing, just drank her coffee and watched the snow fall outside the window. When breakfast was over, she cleared the plates without asking for help and started washing them. Sadie stood. "Come on," she said to her sisters. "Let's go." They disappeared upstairs. Evelyn kept washing. An hour later, Caleb came in from the barn, stomping snow off his boots. He stopped when he saw the kitchen. "You did all this?" he asked. "That's what you hired me for," Evelyn said. He looked around slowly, at the clean floor, the scrubbed stove, the empty sink. "The other women never made it this far." "I'm not the other women," Caleb nodded once. "I can see that." He poured himself coffee and stood at the window staring out at the snow-covered pasture. "Girls give you trouble yet?" he asked. "Not yet." "They will." Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel. "I know." Caleb glanced at her. "Why are you really here? You offered me a job." "That's not an answer." Evelyn met his eyes. "Because I had nowhere else to go, same as you said." "And when it gets hard, when Sadie starts making your life hell, what then?" Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Then I survive it, same as I've survived everything else." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good," he said quietly, and walked back outside. Mak. The trouble started on the third day. Evelyn woke up to find her dress soaked. Not damp, soaked. Someone had dumped an entire bucket of water over her bed while she slept, or tried to sleep. The blanket was drenched, the mattress was ruined. Her spare clothes, folded neatly on the dresser, were sopping wet. Evelyn stood in the doorway, dripping, staring at the disaster. She knew exactly who did it. Upstairs, she heard muffled laughter. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She stripped the bed, wrung out the blanket as best she could, and hung everything outside to freeze dry in the cold air. Then she put on her wet dress, because it was the only one she had, and went to make breakfast. Her hands shook the entire time. Not from anger, from cold. When the girls came down, Sadie was smirking. "Sleep well?" she asked sweetly. Evelyn set a plate of eggs in front of her without a word. Sadie's smirk faded. "You're not going to say anything?" she pressed. "About what?" Evelyn asked. "About—" Sadie stopped. "Nothing." Evelyn poured coffee. "Then there's nothing to say." Sadie stared at her, thrown off. June looked down at her plate. Millie hummed and ate her eggs. The rest of the day passed in cold silence. But Evelyn didn't leave. On the 4th day, someone sewed her boots shut. On the 5th, her flour was mixed with dirt. On the 6th, she found her room door nailed shut from the outside. Every morning, Evelyn woke up to some new act of sabotage. And every morning, she fixed it and kept working. She didn't yell, didn't complain, didn't give Sadie the satisfaction of seeing her break. She just endured. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the house started changing. The floors stayed clean, the laundry got done, meals appeared on the table every day, hot and edible. The windows were scrubbed, the pantry was organized, the smell of mildew faded, replaced by the scent of bread and soap and wood smoke. The house started breathing again. June began lingering in the kitchen while Evelyn cooked, watching quietly from the corner. She never spoke, never helped, just watched. Millie started following Evelyn around, chattering endlessly about her doll, about the chickens, about nothing and everything. Even Caleb noticed. One evening he came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway, staring at the table set with actual napkins and steaming bowls of stew. "This is—" He trailed off. "Supper," Evelyn said. "I can see that." He sat down slowly, like he wasn't sure it was real. Sadie sat across from him, arms crossed, silent, but she ate. And when the meal was over, when the dishes were cleared and the fire was banked and the house settled into quiet, Evelyn went to her tiny room and sat on her half-dry bed and finally let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the weight of surviving one more day in a place that didn't want her. But she didn't cry. She'd survived worse. And tomorrow, she'd do it all over again. The first time Victor Hale came to the ranch, Evelyn was scrubbing blood out of the floorboards. One of the chickens had gotten inside somehow, probably through the gap under the back door that Caleb kept saying he'd fix, and Millie's cat had cornered it in the hallway. The result was carnage. Feathers everywhere. Blood smeared across the wood. The chicken survived, barely, but the mess it left behind looked like a murder scene. Evelyn was on her hands and knees with a brush and a bucket when she heard the wagon pull up outside. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Through the window, she could see a man climbing down from a polished black wagon, the kind of wagon that didn't belong on a working ranch. Too clean, too expensive. The man himself matched the wagon. Tall, well-dressed, dark suit, pressed shirt, boots so shiny they reflected sunlight. He carried a leather case under one arm and moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Evelyn stood slowly, knees protesting. Something about him made her uneasy. She dried her hands on her apron and walked to the door just as the man knocked. 3 sharp raps that sounded more like a demand than a request. Evelyn opened the door. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "I'm looking for Mr. Caleb Thorne." "He's working," Evelyn said. "I see." The man's gaze traveled over her slowly, taking in her stained apron, her rolled sleeves, her rough hands. His smile never wavered. "And you are?" "The housekeeper." "Ah." He nodded like that explained everything. "Well, I'm Victor Hale. I handle land acquisitions and financial consulting in this region. Is Mr. Thorne available? I have some rather urgent business to discuss." Like I said, he's working. Perhaps you could fetch him? Evelyn's jaw tightened. Perhaps you could wait. Hale's smile thinned. I'm afraid this matter can't wait. Then I'm afraid you'll have to come back another time. They stared at each other. Hale's eyes were cold now, calculating. He wasn't used to being turned away, especially not by a housekeeper. I'll wait, he said finally. Evelyn didn't move. Out here. Excuse me? You can wait out here, on the porch. Hale's expression hardened. It's freezing. Then you'll want to make it quick. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might push past her. His hand twitched toward the door like he was considering it, but then footsteps crunched through the snow behind him, and Caleb appeared around the side of the house, leading a horse toward the barn. He stopped when he saw Hale. His whole body went rigid. Mr. Thorne, Hale called out, turning with that same smooth smile. Just the man I was hoping to see. Caleb didn't smile back. What do you want, Hale? Just a friendly conversation. Hale gestured toward the house. Perhaps we could speak inside. Out of the cold? We can talk right here. Hale's smile flickered. Very well. He opened his leather case and pulled out a stack of papers. I wanted to discuss the outstanding note on your property, the one due this spring. Caleb's expression didn't change. What about it? Well, I've recently acquired it. The words hung in the cold air like a threat. Caleb's jaw tightened. From who? The bank in Millstone County. They were looking to offload some of their more uncertain assets. I made them a fair offer. Hale held out the papers. As you can see, the debt is now held by my firm, which means any payments, or lack thereof, will be handled directly through me. Caleb took the papers slowly, eyes scanning the text. Evelyn watched from the doorway, heart pounding. She knew exactly what this was. She'd seen it before, back in Blackstone Ridge. Predators like Hale didn't buy debt to collect payments. They bought it to control people, to corner them, to squeeze until there was nothing left. This doesn't change anything, Caleb said finally, handing the papers back. I'll have the money by spring. I certainly hope so. Hale tucked the papers away carefully. Though I should mention, the terms have been adjusted slightly. What terms? The interest rate. It's been increased to reflect the current risk level associated with this property. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. You can't do that. I'm afraid I can. The original contract included a provision allowing for rate adjustments in the event of ownership transfer. You'll find it outlined in Section 7, subsection 3. Hale's smile returned. All perfectly legal, I assure you. Legal doesn't make it right. Perhaps not. But it is binding. Hale glanced around the property, at the sagging barn, the patched fence, the worn-down buildings. Of course, if you find yourself unable to meet the new terms, I'd be more than happy to discuss alternative arrangements. A sale, for instance. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for the land. I'm not selling. I understand. Emotional attachments can be difficult to overcome. Hale's gaze shifted to Evelyn, then back to Caleb. But I'd encourage you to think carefully about your position. You have 3 daughters to consider. Surely their welfare is worth more than pride. Caleb took a step forward. Evelyn moved before she thought about it, stepping off the porch and positioning herself between the 2 men. I think you've said your piece, she said calmly. Hale looked at her with barely concealed irritation. This is a private business matter. And you've delivered your message. Time to leave. Hale's eyes narrowed. You're awfully bold for a housekeeper. You're awfully threatening for a businessman. The air went cold. Hale stared at Evelyn like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, measuring her, deciding whether she was a problem worth addressing. Then he smiled again. I'll be back, he said to Caleb. We'll talk again soon. In the meantime, I'd suggest you start making arrangements. Spring comes faster than you think. He climbed into his wagon, snapped the reins, and drove away without looking back. Evelyn and Caleb stood in the snow, watching until the wagon disappeared over the hill. Then Caleb turned to her. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Done what? Gotten in his way. He was threatening you. He was making a business proposal. He was circling like a vulture. Caleb's expression was unreadable. You don't know him. I know men like him. Evelyn's voice was hard. I spent 11 years watching them destroy my husband piece by piece. I know exactly what he is. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he walked past her toward the barn without another word. Evelyn stood alone in the snow, heart still pounding, hands shaking from something that wasn't cold. She'd just made an enemy. She knew it, but she wasn't sorry. Basat. That night the house felt different. Evelyn couldn't explain it. Nothing had changed physically. Same rooms, same furniture, same creaking floors. But there was a tension in the air now, thick and heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. She finished cleaning up after supper and found Sadie sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Your father needs help in the barn," Evelyn said. Sadie didn't move. "He always needs help." "Then you should go help him." "Why? So he can pretend everything's fine?" Sadie's voice was bitter. "So he can keep lying to himself that we're not about to lose everything?" Evelyn set down the dish towel. "You heard?" "Course I heard. Whole house heard." Sadie finally looked up. "That man who came today, he's going to take the ranch, isn't he?" "Not if your father pays the debt." "He can't pay it. He doesn't have the money." "He has until spring." "Spring's 4 months away." Sadie laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think we're going to magically find enough money to pay off a debt that's been bleeding us dry for 2 years? You think some miracle's going to happen?" Evelyn pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Sadie's eyes widened slightly. "What are you doing?" "Sitting." "I can see that." "Why?" "Because you're upset, and I'm listening." Sadie stared at her. "I don't need you to listen." "Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway." They sat in silence. Then Sadie spoke, voice quieter now. "My mother could have fixed this." Evelyn said nothing. She was good at things like this, talking to people, making deals. She would have known what to say to that man. Sadie's hands clenched on the table. "But she's gone, and my father can't do it alone. And her voice cracked. "I don't know how to help him." "You're 15, Evelyn said gently. "It's not your job to fix this." "Then whose job is it?" Sadie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because it sure as hell isn't yours. You've been here 2 weeks. You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." "No," Evelyn agreed. "I don't." "Then why are you still here?" Evelyn thought about that. Why was she still here? She could have left a dozen times by now, could have walked away after the first bucket of water, the first sabotaged meal, the first door nailed shut. She didn't owe these people anything, didn't owe this place anything. But somewhere between scrubbing floors and cooking meals and surviving Sadie's hatred, something had shifted. This broken house, this grieving family, it had stopped feeling like a job. It had started feeling like something she couldn't quite name. "I'm here because I don't have anywhere else to go," Evelyn said finally. "Same reason I came in the first place." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Sadie looked away. "That man's going to come back, and when he does, he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." "Probably. So what are we supposed to do?" "We survive," Evelyn said. "Same as we've been doing." Sadie's laugh was bitter. "That's your plan? Just survive?" "It's worked so far." "For how long?" Evelyn didn't have an answer to that. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Small footsteps padded across the floor. Millie appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her doll, eyes half closed with sleep. "I had a bad dream," she mumbled. Sadie stood immediately. "Come here, Bug." Millie stumbled down the stairs and wrapped her arms around her sister's waist. Sadie held her tight, one hand stroking her tangled hair, and for a moment she looked less like a 15-year-old trying to hold a family together and more like a child herself. Evelyn stood quietly and started banking the fire. "You should get some sleep," she said to Sadie. Sadie nodded, still holding Millie. "Yeah." She carried her sister upstairs without looking back. Evelyn finished with the fire and stood alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Victor Hale would come back. She knew it, and when he did, things were going to get worse before they got better. Hale returned 3 days later. This time Caleb wasn't on the property. He'd ridden into town early that morning to negotiate with the feed supplier, leaving Evelyn alone with the girls. She was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard the wagon pull up. Her stomach dropped. She set down the pitchfork and walked to the barn door, wiping her hands on her skirt. Hale was climbing down from his wagon, same polished boots, same expensive suit. But this time he wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, big, rough-looking men with hard faces and harder hands. Hired muscle. The kind of men who got paid to intimidate. Evelyn's heart started pounding. She stepped out of the barn, positioning herself between Hale and the house. "Mr. Thorne isn't here," she said. Hale smiled. "I know. I waited until I saw him leave." The honesty of it was almost worse than a lie. "Then you should come back when he's home," Evelyn said. "I'm afraid I can't do that." Hale gestured to the two men. "I'm here to conduct an inventory." "An inventory of what?" "The property, the livestock, the equipment." Hale pulled out a folded document. "According to the terms of the deed agreement, I have the legal right to assess the value of all assets on this land. Just a precaution, you understand, in case alternative arrangements become necessary. You're counting what you're going to steal." Hale's smile didn't waver. "I'm protecting my investment." The barn door creaked behind Evelyn. She turned and saw Sadie standing there, eyes wide, hands clenched at her sides. "Get back inside," Evelyn said quietly. "What's he doing here?" Sadie demanded. "Business," Hale said smoothly. "Nothing for you to worry about, young lady." "Don't talk to her," Evelyn snapped. Hale raised an eyebrow. "You seem to forget your place. My place is keeping this house running, and you're trespassing. I have legal authorization." "I don't care what you have. You're not going through this property while Mr. Thorne is gone." One of Hale's men took a step forward. Evelyn didn't move. Sadie came up beside her. She said, "Get off our land." Hale studied them both, the housekeeper and the 15-year-old girl, standing together in the snow, facing down three grown men. He looked amused. "You're very brave," he said to Evelyn, "or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Doesn't matter what you think. It will when your employer can't pay his debts." Hale tucked the document back into his coat. "But I can see this isn't the right time for a civil conversation. I'll return when Mr. Thorne is available to escort me personally." He climbed back into his wagon, but before he left, he leaned down and looked directly at Evelyn. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "Women in your position are very easy to replace." Then he snapped the reins and drove away. Evelyn stood frozen, blood roaring in her ears. Sadie was shaking beside her. "What did he mean by that?" Evelyn forced herself to breathe. "Nothing. He's just trying to scare us." It worked. Evelyn looked down at the girl. Sadie's face was pale, her jaw tight, but she wasn't crying, wasn't running, just standing there, scared but stubborn. For the first time since Evelyn had arrived, Sadie looked at her without hatred. "You didn't have to do that," Sadie said quietly. "Yes, I did." "Why?" Evelyn didn't know how to answer that, so she just turned and walked back into the barn, heart still pounding, hands still shaking. Behind her, she heard Sadie follow. They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, mucking stalls and hauling water and feeding the horses. When Caleb came home that afternoon, Evelyn told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "He'll come back." "I know. And next time he won't ask permission." "I know that too." Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. "I need to talk to a lawyer, see if there's anything I can do to stop this." "Can you afford a lawyer?" "No." He looked at her. "But I can't afford not to have one either." That night, after the girls were asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for emergencies. He poured himself a glass, then he poured one for Evelyn. She sat down across from him without being asked. "I never thanked you," Caleb said quietly, "for standing up to him." "You don't need to thank me." "I do, though." He took a drink. The other women who worked here, they would have let him walk right in, would have smiled and nodded and helped him count every nail in the barn. They were scared. So were you. Evelyn picked up her glass but didn't drink. "Fear doesn't mean you stop fighting." Caleb studied her. "Where'd you learn that?" "Same place everyone does. By surviving things that should have killed me." They sat in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "I'm going to lose this place." Evelyn looked up. "You don't know that." "I do. I've known it for months, maybe longer." He stared into his glass. "I just didn't want to admit it." "Then why are you still fighting?" Because of them. He nodded toward the ceiling where his daughters slept. Because this is the only home they've ever known. Because their mother's buried out past the north pasture, and I promised her I'd keep this place running no matter what. His voice cracked on the last word. Evelyn set down her glass. You're not going to lose it, she said. You don't know that. No. But I know you're not giving up. And I know that bastard Hale doesn't get to win just because he has money and a piece of paper. Caleb looked at her. You sound sure. I am sure. Why? Because I've watched men like him destroy everything I love once already. Evelyn's voice was hard. I'm not letting it happen again. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the bottle and poured them each another glass. To survival, he said. Evelyn raised her glass. To survival. They drank. And outside, the wind howled through the valley like something wild and hungry, circling the ranch, testing for weakness. Come. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Hale didn't come back, but his presence lingered like smoke after a fire. Caleb rode into town twice to meet with a lawyer, an old man named Garrett, who'd been practicing law since before Montana was even a territory. Each time, Caleb came home looking more exhausted, more defeated. What'd he say? Evelyn asked after the second visit. Caleb dropped into a chair. He said Hale's contract is airtight. Every clause, every loophole. It's all legal, even the rate increase. There has to be something. There isn't. Caleb rubbed his eyes. Unless I can pay the full amount by spring, Hale owns this place. That's it. That's the law. Evelyn's jaw tightened. How much do you need? $1,800. The number hit like a punch. $1,800. It might as well have been $18,000. How much do you have? Evelyn asked. Maybe $600. If I sell everything I can afford to lose. And if you sell everything you can't afford to lose? Caleb looked at her. Then I have no ranch to save. They sat in silence. Evelyn's mind raced, running through possibilities, searching for solutions that didn't exist. Then she remembered something. What about my debt? She asked slowly. Caleb frowned. What about it? Hale mentioned he owns it. The debt from my old house. So? So how much is it? I don't know. Why does it matter? Evelyn leaned forward. Because if he's using my debt as leverage against you, then maybe we can use it right back. Caleb shook his head. I don't follow. Neither do I yet. But there's something there. Some angle he's working. Evelyn stood. I need to go into town. For what? To find out exactly what Hale owns and why he wants it. Caleb looked skeptical. You think you're going to walk into his office and he's just going to tell you? No, but I know where to ask. But Evelyn rode into Blackstone Ridge the next morning on one of Caleb's horses, a stubborn mare that tried to throw her twice before they even left the property. The town looked exactly the same as the day she'd left it, cold, gray, unwelcoming. She tied the horse outside the courthouse and walked inside, ignoring the stares that followed her. The clerk at the records office was a thin, nervous man who kept adjusting his spectacles. I need to see property records, Evelyn said. The clerk blinked. For what property? Mine. The house on Birch Street that was seized 3 months ago. I'm afraid those records are confidential. I'm the widow. I have a right to see them. The clerk hesitated. I suppose that's true. Let me check. He disappeared into the back room and returned 10 minutes later with a dusty file. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside were all the documents from the foreclosure, the original loan, the missed payments, the seizure order. But at the bottom was something new, a transfer of ownership. Dated 2 weeks after the foreclosure, Victor Hale had purchased the property for $300, a fraction of what it was worth. Evelyn's hands shook as she read. Can I see records for other properties? She asked. The clerk shifted nervously. That's unusual. Please. Something in her voice made him nod. He brought out more files. One by one, Evelyn went through them. And one by one, she found the same pattern. Foreclosures, seizures, properties sold at auction for pennies on the dollar, and every single one purchased by Victor Hale. 12 properties in the last 2 years, all from families who couldn't pay their debts, all sold for far less than their value. Evelyn's stomach turned. This wasn't business. This was a system. Hale wasn't just buying debt. He was creating it, manipulating it, using the law to legally steal from people who had no way to fight back. She copied down the names of every family he'd destroyed. Then she thanked the clerk and walked out. But instead of going home, she went to the boarding house. Mrs. Pritchard answered the door with a scowl. "We don't have rooms available." "I'm not looking for a room," Evelyn said. "I'm looking for information." Mrs. Pritchard's scowl deepened. "About what?" "About the families Victor Hale destroyed. I know you know them. I know you know what happened." "Why would I tell you anything?" "Because he's going after another one. And if I don't stop him, more people are going to lose everything." Mrs. Pritchard stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she stepped aside. "Come in." They sat in the boarding house parlor, a room Evelyn had never been allowed to enter when she lived in town. Mrs. Pritchard poured tea with shaking hands. "Victor Hale is a monster," she said quietly. "But he's a legal monster. Everything he does is within the law." "That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it hard to fight." Mrs. Pritchard set down her cup. "He destroyed my sister's family, bought their debt, raised the interest, took their farm before they even knew what was happening. She lives in Denver now, works in a factory, hasn't spoken to me in a year." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't help." Mrs. Pritchard looked at her. "Why are you asking about this?" "Because he's doing it again, to the family I work for." "The Thorns?" Evelyn nodded. Mrs. Pritchard closed her eyes. "Those poor girls. First they lose their mother, now this. I'm trying to stop it." "You can't." "I have to try." Mrs. Pritchard looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since Evelyn had known her. "You're different than you were," she said finally. "Different how?" "Harder, stronger." Mrs. Pritchard's expression softened slightly. "I was cruel to you when you lived here. I'm sorry for that." Evelyn didn't know what to say. "I have something that might help," Mrs. Pritchard said. She stood and went to a desk in the corner, pulling out a folder. "After my sister lost everything, I started keeping records. Every family Hale's gone after, every property he's taken, every legal trick he's used." She handed the folder to Evelyn. "I don't know what you're going to do with it," Mrs. Pritchard said, "but maybe it's worth something." Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were pages and pages of notes, names, dates, property values, legal documents, evidence. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. "Just don't waste it." Evelyn rode home as the sun set, the folder tucked safely in her coat. Her mind was racing. She didn't have a plan yet, but she had something, and something was more than she'd had this morning. When she got back to the ranch, Caleb was waiting on the porch. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. "I've been worried sick." Evelyn climbed down from the horse and handed him the folder. "What's this?" he asked. "Ammunition?" Caleb opened it slowly, eyes scanning the pages. His expression changed. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" He looked up at her. This is everything. Every family he's destroyed, every property he's stolen." "I know. If we can prove he's been doing this systematically, if we can show a pattern, we might have a chance," Evelyn finished. Caleb stared at the folder like it was made of gold. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "I told you. I'm not letting him win." "That's not an answer." Evelyn met his eyes. "Because this place is the first thing that's felt like home since my husband died," she said. "And I'm not losing it without a fight." The words hung in the cold air between them. Caleb's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. "Thank you," he said. Evelyn nodded once. Then she went inside to start supper, leaving him standing on the porch with the folder in his hands and hope flickering in his chest for the first time in months. The folder sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before Caleb did anything with it. Evelyn watched him circle it like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. He'd pick it up, flip through a few pages, then set it down again and walk away. She didn't push him, didn't ask questions, just kept the house running while he wrestled with whatever decision he was trying to make. On the 4th morning, he finally spoke. "I'm taking this to Garrett," he said, tapping the folder. "The lawyer in town. See if there's anything here he can use." Evelyn was kneading bread dough, flour up to her elbows. "You think he'll help?" Don't know, but it's worth trying. He left before breakfast, riding hard toward town. Evelyn went back to the bread, hands working the dough with more force than necessary. She'd given him everything she could find, every scrap of evidence, every pattern, every name. But she knew how the law worked, knew that sometimes having proof didn't matter when the other side had money and connections. Still, it was something. It had to be something. The girls were quieter than usual that morning. Even Millie, who normally chattered through breakfast like a magpie, just pushed her eggs around her plate without eating. "Is Papa going to lose the ranch?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. June looked up, eyes wide and frightened. Sadie's fork clattered against her plate. "No," Sadie said sharply. "He's not." "But that man said—" "I don't care what that man said." Sadie stood abruptly. "Papa's going to figure it out. He always does." But her voice cracked on the last word, and Evelyn saw the fear underneath the anger. Sadie was 15 years old, trying to hold herself together with spit and stubbornness, and it was breaking her. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. "Your father's fighting. That's what matters." "Fighting doesn't always work," Sadie said bitterly. "No, but giving up doesn't work either." Sadie stared at her for a long moment, then grabbed her coat and walked out the back door, letting it slam behind her. June flinched at the sound. Millie looked like she might cry. Evelyn sat down at the table and pulled Millie onto her lap without thinking about it. The girl came willingly, burying her face in Evelyn's shoulder. "Is everything going to be okay?" Millie whispered. Evelyn wanted to lie, wanted to promise her that yes, everything would be fine, that the ranch was safe, that they'd never have to leave, that nothing bad would ever happen again. But she couldn't, because she didn't know. "I don't know, sweetheart," Evelyn said quietly, "but we're going to do everything we can to make sure it is." Millie nodded against her shoulder, small and trusting. June watched them from across the table, something shifting in her expression. She'd been so quiet since Evelyn arrived, barely speaking, barely existing except as a shadow following her older sister. But now she looked at Evelyn with something that might have been hope. "Can I help?" June asked, voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn blinked. "Help with what?" "With whatever needs doing. To save the ranch." June's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm not big like Sadie, and I'm not good at talking, but I can work." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You're 11 years old. This isn't your job." "It's our home," June said simply. "That makes it my job, too." And there it was. The thing Evelyn had been trying not to see, trying not to feel. These girls weren't just Caleb's daughters anymore. They were becoming hers too. Not by blood, not by law, but by something deeper. Something built through shared meals and cleaned floors and survived storms. "All right," Evelyn said finally. "You can help me in the garden this afternoon. There's still work to be done before winter really sets in." June's face brightened just a fraction. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Caleb came home just after dark, looking worse than when he'd left. Evelyn was putting supper on the table when he walked in. The girls were already seated, waiting. Caleb hung his coat by the door and sat down heavily without saying a word. "Well?" Sadie demanded. "What did the lawyer say?" Caleb stared at his plate. "He said it's good. The folder, all that information. It shows a pattern. So he can use it? Maybe. He's not sure." Caleb rubbed his face. "Problem is, even if we prove Hale's been doing this to other families, it doesn't change the contract. The debt's still legal. The terms are still legal. Unless we can pay the full amount by spring, none of it matters." Sadie's jaw tightened. "So we're still losing." "We're still fighting," Caleb corrected. "But yeah, we're losing." The table went silent. Evelyn set down the pot of stew and sat. "There has to be another way. If there is, I can't see it." "What about selling something? Cattle? Equipment?" "Already planning on it, but it won't be enough, not even close." Caleb finally looked up. "I've run the numbers 100 different ways. We're $1,200 short, and there's no way to make that up in 4 months." "What about a loan?" June asked quietly. "From who? Every bank within 50 miles knows I'm already in debt up to my neck. No one's going to loan me more." The hopelessness in his voice was worse than anger. Evelyn's mind raced, searching for solutions that didn't exist. There had to be something. Some angle they weren't seeing, some option they hadn't considered. But what? They ate in silence, the weight of defeat pressing down on all of them. After supper, Evelyn started clearing the plates. The girls disappeared upstairs without being asked. Caleb sat at the table, staring at nothing. "You should get some rest," Evelyn said quietly. "Can't. You need to." "I need to figure this out." He looked at her. "I keep thinking about my wife, about the promise I made her before she died. She asked me to keep this place running, to give the girls a home, and I'm about to break that promise." Evelyn set down the plate she was holding. "You're doing everything you can. It's not enough. Then we find another way." "There is no other way," Caleb's voice cracked. "I've looked at this from every angle. I've considered every option, and no matter what I do, we lose. That's it. That's the end." He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, and walked out the back door into the night. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, heart pounding. She finished the dishes slowly, giving him space, giving herself time to think. Then she dried her hands and followed him outside. Caleb was standing by the fence, staring out at the dark pasture. The moon was up, casting silver light across the snow-covered ground. Evelyn walked up beside him and said nothing. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Caleb spoke. "Victor Hale came to see me today, after I left the lawyer's office." Evelyn's blood went cold. "What did he want?" "To make me an offer. Said he'd forgive the entire debt if I signed the property over to him. No auction, no public humiliation, just a clean transfer." "What did you say?" "I told him to go to hell." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "But he's going to keep pushing," Caleb continued. "And eventually, he's going to win. Not because he's right, because the law's on his side." "The law isn't always justice." "No, but it's what we're stuck with." Caleb turned to look at her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about this place feeling like home." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "I think it feels that way because of you," Caleb said quietly. "The house has been dead for 2 years, ever since my wife passed. But you came in, and you brought it back to life. The girls are eating real meals again. The house is clean, there's laughter sometimes, things I thought were gone forever." Evelyn didn't know what to say. "And I realized something today," Caleb continued. "When Hale was making his offer, threatening to take everything, I wasn't just scared of losing the ranch. I was scared of losing you." The words hung between them like a held breath. "I know that's not fair," Caleb said quickly. "You didn't come here for that. You came because you needed work. And I have no right to "Stop," Evelyn said. Caleb stopped. Evelyn turned to face him fully. "What are you trying to say?" He met her eyes. "I'm saying that maybe there's another way to fight this. A way that could protect both of us." "I'm listening." Caleb took a deep breath. "Marry me." Evelyn's heart stopped. "Not for love," Caleb said quickly. "Not for romance. Just for protection. For legal reasons." The words tumbled out faster now. "Under territorial law, a married household gets certain protections. Your debt would transfer under my name, which would complicate Hale's leverage. And together, we'd have a stronger legal position." Garrett explained it all. "It's not a guarantee, but it's a chance." Evelyn stared at him. Her mind was reeling. Marriage. She'd buried one husband less than 4 months ago, stood over Thomas's grave and promised herself she'd never do this again, never tie herself to a man, never make herself dependent, never put herself in that position of vulnerability. And now Caleb was asking her to do exactly that. "This is insane," she said. "I know. You barely know me. I know enough." "Do you?" Evelyn's voice rose. "You know I'm a widow with debt I can't pay. You know I'm desperate enough to take a job in the middle of nowhere with a man I'd never met. You know I can cook and clean and keep your house running, but you don't know me." "Then tell me," Caleb said. "Tell me who you are." "I'm nobody!" The words burst out of her, raw and angry. "I'm the woman this town threw away. The woman who's too big, too poor, too much trouble. I'm a burden. I've always been a burden. And you're asking me to become your wife so I can be a burden with legal protections? That's not a..." "That's exactly what you're saying." Evelyn was shaking now. "You're asking me to marry you to save your ranch. Not because you want me, because you need me. And I've spent my whole life being needed by people who didn't actually want me around." Caleb flinched like she'd slapped him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. This was a terrible idea." He started to turn away, and Evelyn heard herself say, "Wait." Caleb stopped. Evelyn's hands were trembling. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She thought about the girls upstairs, about Sadie, who'd finally stopped hating her, about June, who'd asked to help today for the first time, about Millie, who climbed into her lap like it was the safest place in the world. She thought about this house that had become home when she wasn't looking, about the meals she cooked and the floors she scrubbed and the life she'd built here piece by piece. She thought about Victor Hale and his polished boots and his cold smile, about all the families he'd destroyed, about how he was going to do it again unless someone stopped him. And she realized something that terrified her more than any proposal, more than any marriage, more than any risk. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to watch this family fall apart. She didn't want to lose the first place that had felt like belonging since Thomas died. "If I do this," Evelyn said slowly, "it's not because I need saving. I've saved myself before. I can do it again." Caleb nodded. "And it's not because I think you're going to rescue me from my life. I don't need rescuing." "I know. I'd be doing it for them." Evelyn nodded toward the house. "For those girls who've already lost too much. Because they deserve to keep their home, and because her voice caught. "Because I can't watch them lose it." Caleb's expression softened. "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe. I need time to think." "We don't have much time." "I know." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. "But I'm not making this decision tonight, not when I'm angry and scared and don't know which way is up." "That's fair." They stood in the cold for another moment. Then Evelyn went back inside, leaving Caleb alone in the moonlight. She climbed the stairs to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. Marriage. The word kept echoing in her skull. She'd loved Thomas, really loved him, and he'd loved her back in his quiet, steady way. But even that marriage had been hard, full of struggle and debt and constant worry. And this? This would be something else entirely, a transaction, a legal arrangement, a partnership built on desperation instead of affection. Could she do that? Could she tie herself to a man she barely knew, in a place that wasn't really hers, for the sake of 3 girls who weren't her daughters? Evelyn closed her eyes. The answer should have been no, should have been simple and clean and self-preserving. But when she thought about leaving, about packing her bag and walking away from this ranch, from these people, from this life, her chest felt like it was caving in. She fell asleep, still trying to decide. Morning came gray and cold. Evelyn woke before dawn and went downstairs to start breakfast. Her hands moved on autopilot, mixing batter, heating the stove, brewing coffee. She still hadn't made a decision. The girls came down one by one, quiet and subdued. Even Millie didn't chatter. They ate in silence, the weight of yesterday's conversation hanging over them, even though they didn't know what had been said. Caleb didn't come to breakfast. Evelyn found him in the barn an hour later, mucking out stalls. "We need to talk," she said. He set down the pitchfork. "All right. Not here. Walk with me." They walked out past the barn, past the chicken coop, past the storage shed. The ground was frozen solid, crunching under their boots. The sky was the color of old iron. When they were far enough from the house that no one could overhear, Evelyn stopped. "I'll do it," she said. Caleb's eyes widened. "You will? On certain conditions?" "What conditions?" Evelyn had thought about this all night. "First, this is a partnership, not ownership. I'm not becoming your property just because I'm your wife. We make decisions together or we don't make them at all." "Agreed." "Second, the girls. I'm not trying to replace their mother. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. But if we're doing this, I need to know you'll support me when they push back. Because they will. I will. Third, if this doesn't work, if we lose the ranch anyway, you don't get to blame me. This is a risk we're taking together. And if it fails, but I won't be your scapegoat." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have a condition too." Evelyn blinked. What? If we do this, if we get married and fight Hale and somehow manage to keep this place, you don't get to leave the minute things get easier. You don't get to walk away once the danger's passed. Why would I? Because I've watched people leave my whole life, Caleb said, voice rough. My wife didn't choose to go. But every housekeeper I hired, every friend who said they'd help after she died, they all left eventually. Everyone leaves, and I need to know that if I'm asking you to be my wife, even in name only, that you're staying. Not forever, maybe, but not just until the fight's over. Evelyn heard the fear underneath his words, the same fear she carried, the fear of being abandoned, of being left behind, of not being worth staying for. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. Not unless you want me gone. I won't want you gone. Then we have a deal. They stood facing each other in the frozen field, two broken people making a desperate bargain. Caleb held out his hand. Evelyn took it. His grip was firm, calloused, real. We'll go to town tomorrow, Caleb said. Talk to Garrett. Make it official. What do we tell the girls? Caleb hesitated. The truth. That we're doing this to protect the family. They're going to have questions. I know. Sadie's going to be angry. Probably. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. This is completely insane. Yeah, Caleb agreed. It is. They walked back to the house in silence, hands no longer touching, both of them wondering what they'd just agreed to. They told the girls that night after supper. Evelyn had expected anger, tears, accusations. What she got was worse. Silence. Sadie sat frozen at the table, staring at her father like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. June's eyes were wide and shocked. Millie looked confused. What does married mean? It means Evelyn's going to be your stepmother, Caleb said carefully. Legally, on paper, so we can protect the ranch. But you don't love her, Sadie said flatly. The words cut. Caleb didn't flinch. This isn't about love. It's about survival. That's disgusting. Sadie! No! Sadie stood abruptly. You're going to marry someone you don't even love just to keep a piece of land? What about Mama? What about everything she... Your mother is dead. Caleb's voice cracked like a whip. The room went silent. Sadie's face went white. Caleb closed his eyes, breathing hard. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Your mother is dead, and I loved her, and I miss her every single day, but she's gone, and we're still here, and we need to survive. This is how we do it. By pretending? Sadie's voice shook. By lying? By adapting, Evelyn said quietly. Sadie turned on her. You don't get to talk. This isn't your family. You're right. It's not. But I'm still here, and I'm still fighting for it. Why? Sadie demanded. What do you even get out of this? Evelyn met her eyes. A home. Same as you. Sadie stared at her. Then she turned and ran upstairs, footsteps pounding, door slamming. June stood slowly. I'm going to check on her. She left without another word. Millie stayed at the table, looking between Evelyn and Caleb with big, worried eyes. Are you going to live with us forever now? She asked Evelyn. Evelyn's throat tightened. I don't know about forever, but for now, yes. Okay. Millie thought about that. Can I still call you Evelyn? Of course. Good, because I don't want to call you Mama. That's what I called my real mama. I understand. Millie nodded, satisfied, and went upstairs to bed. Evelyn and Caleb sat alone at the table. That went well, Caleb said dryly. Evelyn almost laughed. Could have been worse. Could have been better, too. They sat in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, Thank you for doing this. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. No, but we're still fighting. That counts for something. Evelyn stood and started clearing the dishes. We leave for town tomorrow? First thing. Then I should get some sleep. She walked toward her room, but Caleb's voice stopped her. Evelyn? She turned. For what it's worth, Caleb said quietly, I'm glad you're here. Not just because of the ranch. Because of everything. The house. The girls. You brought something back that I thought was gone forever. Evelyn's chest tightened. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and went to bed. But she lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell she'd just agreed to, and whether she'd regret it. They rode into town the next morning under a sky that threatened snow. Garrett's office was above the general store, a cramped room that smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco. The lawyer himself was ancient, bent and thin, with rheumy eyes that still managed to be sharp. He looked at Evelyn and Caleb with something close to amusement. "So you're really doing this?" he said. "We are," Caleb confirmed. "And you understand this is a legal marriage, not a temporary arrangement?" "We understand." Garrett pulled out a stack of papers. "I'll need to file the marriage certificate with the county. Once that's done, Mrs. Mercer's debts will transfer under your name, Mr. Thorne. That'll complicate Hale's position, but it won't eliminate it entirely." "Will it be enough?" Evelyn asked. "Enough for what?" "To save the ranch." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "I'll be honest with you, this buys you time, maybe leverage. But Hale's not an idiot. He'll figure out what you're doing and adapt. The only thing that's really going to save this ranch is paying off that debt in full." "We're working on it," Caleb said. "Then work faster." Garrett started filling out forms. "I'll need both of you to sign here, and you'll need witnesses for the ceremony." "Ceremony?" Evelyn blinked. "You have to actually get married, with a judge or minister present. I can arrange for Judge Morrison if you'd like. He's discreet." Caleb and Evelyn looked at each other. "How soon can he do it?" Caleb asked. "This afternoon, if you're available." "We're available." 2 hours later, Evelyn stood in a small courthouse office wearing the same dress she'd worn to her first husband's funeral. Judge Morrison was a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers. He read through the vows mechanically, like he'd done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times more. "Do you, Caleb James Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Evelyn Rose Mercer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Evelyn's heart pounded. This was it. The moment she could still walk away, still say no, still save herself from this insane decision. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The judge didn't tell Caleb to kiss her. Thank God. They signed the papers in silence, witnessed by Garrett and the judge's clerk. And just like that, Evelyn was married again. To a man she barely knew, in a town that had thrown her away, for a ranch that might be lost anyway. They walked out of the courthouse into the cold afternoon. "Well," Caleb said, "that's done." "Yeah," Evelyn agreed. They stood on the steps, not quite looking at each other. "We should head back," Caleb said finally, "before the weather turns." They climbed into the wagon and started the long ride home. Neither of them spoke. But halfway back to the ranch, Caleb said quietly, "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm glad you're here." Evelyn looked at him. His face was tired, worn, but there was something genuine in his expression. "I'm glad I'm here too," she said, and realized, with a jolt of surprise, that she meant it. They reached the ranch just as the first snow began to fall. The girls were waiting on the porch. When Evelyn and Caleb climbed down from the wagon, Sadie's face was unreadable. "Did you do it?" she asked. "We did," Caleb said. Sadie looked at Evelyn. "So you're my stepmother now." "On paper," Evelyn said carefully. "What's the difference?" "The difference is, I'm not trying to replace your mother. I'm just trying to help your father keep this place running." Sadie stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back inside without another word. June followed her. Millie stayed on the porch, bouncing on her toes. "Do I get to be a flower girl?" "There was no ceremony," Evelyn said. "Just paperwork." "Oh." Millie looked disappointed. "That's boring." Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. They went inside. The house was warm. Supper was waiting on the stove, bread and soup that Sadie must have made while they were gone. They ate together at the table, this strange new family, bound by law and desperation and something Evelyn couldn't quite name. And when the meal was over, when the dishes were cleared and the fire was banked, Evelyn went to her room alone. Because this was a marriage in name only. A partnership. A legal arrangement. Nothing more. She lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside and wondered how long she could keep telling herself that lie. News of the marriage spread through Blackstone Ridge like wildfire. Evelyn heard about it 3 days later when she went into town for supplies. The stares started the moment she stepped into the general store. Women whispering behind their hands. Men watching her with expressions somewhere between contempt and fascination. She ignored them all and filled her basket with flour, sugar, coffee, and salt. At the counter, Mr. Henderson rang up her purchases without meeting her eyes. "That'll be $4.30, he said. Evelyn counted out the money carefully. "Put it on the Thorne account." Henderson's hand paused over the register. "You're Mrs. Thorne now?" "I am." He looked at her properly for the first time. "Heard you married Caleb. That true?" "Wouldn't be using his name if it wasn't." Henderson made a non-committal sound and wrote the purchase in his ledger. "People are talking. People always talk. They're saying it's a scheme, that you're trying to dodge your debts by hiding behind a man." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "People can say whatever they want." "They're also saying Victor Hale's not happy about it." That made Evelyn look up. "He'd say that himself?" "Didn't have to. Came in here yesterday asking questions about you. About Caleb. About when the marriage happened and who witnessed it." Henderson lowered his voice. "He's looking for a way to challenge it." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "Don't know, but if anyone can find a legal loophole, it's Hale." Henderson handed her the receipt. "You be careful, Mrs. Thorne. That man doesn't like losing." Evelyn took her supplies and walked out into the cold. Her mind was racing. Of course Hale would fight back. She'd known that, expected it, but hearing it confirmed made the threat real in a way it hadn't been before. She loaded the supplies into the wagon and was about to climb up when a voice stopped her. "Mrs. Thorne?" Evelyn turned. Victor Hale stood on the sidewalk, dressed in his usual expensive suit, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't smiling this time. "Mr. Hale," Evelyn said evenly, "I wanted to congratulate you on your recent marriage." "Did you?" "Of course. It's always heartwarming when two lonely people find companionship." His tone suggested he didn't find it heartwarming at all. "Though I must admit the timing is rather convenient." "We're not required to justify our choices to you." "No, you're not. But the law is another matter." Hale stepped closer. "You see, there are certain regulations regarding debt transfer in cases of marriage, particularly when one party has outstanding financial obligations." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Our marriage is legal." "I'm sure it is, but legality and legitimacy are sometimes two different things." Hale's eyes were cold. "If I were to discover, for instance, that this marriage was entered into solely for the purpose of evading debt collection, well, that would be fraud. And fraud carries significant penalties." "You can't prove fraud." "Can I?" Hale smiled thinly. "You married a man you'd known for less than 2 months. A man who hired you as a housekeeper. A man who's facing foreclosure on his property. The circumstances are rather damning, wouldn't you say?" Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted, the Thorne property, and I'm prepared to offer very generous terms for a peaceful resolution." "We're not interested." "You should be, because if this goes to court, Mrs. Thorne, you will lose, both of you. And when you do, I'll make certain everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you are." His voice dropped. The desperate widow who married for money, who used her body and her cunning to trap a grieving man. That's the story that will follow you for the rest of your life. The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn stood frozen, hands clenched at her sides. Hale watched her reaction with satisfaction. "Think about it. You have until the end of the week to accept my offer. After that, I file a formal challenge to your marriage, and we let the courts decide." He tipped his hat and walked away. Evelyn stood alone on the street, shaking, not from fear, from rage. She climbed into the wagon and drove home faster than she should have, the horses straining against the reins. When she reached the ranch, Caleb was in the barn. She found him mucking stalls and told him everything Hale had said. Caleb's face went white. "He's going to challenge the marriage," he said slowly. "He said he would." "Can he actually do that?" "I don't know, but he seems to think he can." Caleb sat down heavily on a hay bale. "If he proves fraud, if the court rules against us—" "We lose everything," Evelyn finished. The ranch, the protection, all of it. They sat in silence. Then Caleb said, "We need to talk to Garrett, today." They rode back to town immediately, leaving the girls with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the doors locked. Garrett listened to their story with his usual impassive expression, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. When they finished, he set down his pen. "Hale's playing a dangerous game," he said. "Challenging a legal marriage on grounds of fraud is difficult. He'd need to prove intent, that you married specifically and solely to evade debt collection." "Can he prove that?" Caleb asked. "Maybe. The timing is suspicious. You married less than 2 months after Mrs. Thorne arrived, right before Hale acquired both your debts. A prosecutor could make that look calculated." "But we're actually married," Evelyn said. "We signed the papers. A judge officiated. How is that fraud?" "Because fraud isn't about whether the marriage is legal. It's about whether it's genuine." Garrett leaned back in his chair. "The court will ask whether you married for legitimate reasons, companionship, partnership, family, or whether it was purely a financial transaction designed to manipulate the law." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What do we need to prove it's legitimate? Evidence of a genuine relationship, shared living arrangements, joint financial decisions, witnesses who can testify that this wasn't just a legal maneuver." "We do live together," Evelyn said. "We share meals. I help run the household." "That's a start. But Hale will argue you were already doing that as an employee. He'll say the marriage changed nothing except the paperwork." "Then what do we do?" Caleb demanded. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You act like a real married couple, in public, where people can see. You need witnesses who will testify that your relationship is genuine, that you care for each other, that this isn't just a business arrangement." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "You want us to pretend?" "I want you to make it real enough that a court can't call it fraud." They left Garrett's office in silence. The ride home was long and cold. Neither of them spoke until they were almost back at the ranch. Then Caleb said, "We could make this easier on ourselves." "How?" "By making it real." Evelyn looked at him sharply. "What are you talking about?" Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Garrett's right. If we want to convince people this marriage is legitimate, we need to act like it is. That means being a couple, at least in public." "Caleb, I'm not talking about love or romance, just partnership. The kind married people have. We eat together, work together, make decisions together. And when people ask if we're really married, we don't hesitate. We say yes." Evelyn's chest tightened. "You're asking me to lie." "I'm asking you to survive. Same thing I've been asking since you got here." "That's different." "Is it?" Evelyn stared out at the passing landscape. Snow covered everything now, turning the world white and silent. She thought about Hale's threat, about the courtroom, about the story he'd promised to tell, the desperate widow who married for money. The worst part was that it was partly true. She had married for protection, for security, for a chance to save something worth saving. But it wasn't just that. Somewhere along the way, this place had become home. These people had become family, and the idea of losing them felt worse than losing the house in Blackstone Ridge ever had. "All right," she said finally, "we'll do it your way." "You're sure?" "No, but I don't see another option." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we start tomorrow." "Start what?" "Acting like a real married couple in town, where people can see." But the next day was Sunday, which meant church. Evelyn hadn't been to church since Thomas's funeral. The memory of standing in the back of the chapel, feeling every eye on her, hearing the whispers about how quickly she'd lose the house without a man to protect her, it had been enough to keep her away. But Caleb insisted. "People need to see us together," he said. "As a family, this is the easiest way." So Evelyn put on her best dress, the one she'd been married in, since it was the only decent one she owned, and helped the girls get ready. Sadie was furious. "We haven't been to church in over a year," she said. "Why are we going now?" "Because we're a family," Caleb said, "and families go to church." "We were a family before she showed up." "Sadie, that's enough." Sadie glared at Evelyn. "This is because of Hale, isn't it? Because he's trying to prove the marriage is fake?" Caleb's expression hardened. "Where did you hear that?" "I'm not stupid. I know what's happening." Sadie crossed her arms. "And I know you're using her to save the ranch, which means she's using you right back." "That's not..." Yes, it is, Sadie's voice cracked. Everything's a transaction now. Everything's fake. And you want us to go to church and smile and pretend like we're a happy family when we're not. We are a family, Evelyn said quietly. Sadie turned on her. No, we're not. You're an employee who got upgraded, that's all. The words stung, but Evelyn didn't flinch. You're angry. I understand that. But we're still going to church, and you're still going to sit with us. Because whether you like it or not, I am your stepmother now. And we're in this together. Sadie stared at her with pure hatred. Then she grabbed her coat and stormed outside. June followed silently. Millie tugged on Evelyn's skirt. Is Sadie going to be mad forever? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope not. It makes my stomach hurt. Evelyn knelt down and pulled Millie into a hug. Mine too. They rode to church in tense silence. The building was small and drafty, packed with families bundled in their Sunday best. Heads turned when the Thorns walked in. Evelyn felt the weight of every stare. She kept her chin up and followed Caleb to a pew near the middle. The girls filed in. Sadie as far from Evelyn as possible, June in the middle, Millie pressed against Evelyn's side. The service began. Evelyn tried to focus on the words, but all she could feel was the attention. People watching them, judging them, whispering. She knew what they were saying, the same thing Sadie had said, that the marriage was fake, that Evelyn was using Caleb, that this whole thing was a scheme. Maybe they were right. Halfway through the sermon, Caleb reached over and took her hand. Evelyn's breath caught. His grip was firm, deliberate, a clear signal to everyone watching. This is my wife. Evelyn squeezed back, even though her palm was sweating. Millie noticed and smiled. June glanced over, eyes wide. Sadie kept staring straight ahead, jaw tight. The service ended. People filed out slowly, clustering in groups on the steps. Evelyn wanted to leave immediately, but Caleb stopped her. We need to talk to people, he said quietly. Let them see us. I know. They stood on the church steps like they were on display. Several families approached to offer polite congratulations. Most of them looked skeptical, but they maintained the pretense of civility. Then Mrs. Pritchard appeared. She looked at Evelyn with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. Mrs. Thorne, she said carefully, or should I still call you Evelyn? Either is fine. Mrs. Pritchard glanced at Caleb, then back to Evelyn. I heard about the marriage. Congratulations. Thank you. I also heard Victor Hale is unhappy about the arrangement. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Word travels fast. It does in small towns. Mrs. Pritchard lowered her voice. I wanted you to know, if you need someone to speak on your behalf, I will. About your character. About what I know of your situation. Evelyn blinked. You'd do that? I wasn't kind to you before. I'm trying to make amends. Mrs. Pritchard's expression softened. Besides, I've seen what Hale does to families. If you're fighting him, you'll need all the help you can get. Thank you, Evelyn said, throat tight. That means more than you know. Mrs. Pritchard nodded and walked away. Caleb looked at Evelyn with surprise. What was that about? Long story. They made it through another 20 minutes of awkward conversations before finally climbing back into the wagon. Sadie hadn't said a single word the entire time. On the ride home, she finally broke her silence. You held her hand, she said to Caleb. I did. Why? Because that's what married people do. But you're not really married, not like you were with Mama. Caleb's grip tightened on the reins. No, it's different, but it's still real. How can it be real if you don't love her? The question hung in the air. Caleb didn't answer. Evelyn stared at her hands folded in her lap and said nothing, because she didn't have an answer either. 2 days later, Victor Hale filed his legal challenge. Garrett brought them the news personally, riding out to the ranch with the official documents. He's arguing the marriage is fraudulent, Garrett explained, based on timing, financial motivation, and lack of evidence of a genuine relationship prior to the wedding. What happens now? Caleb asked. There'll be a hearing in Millstone County 4 weeks from today. Both of you will need to testify. Hale will present his case, we'll present ours, and the judge will decide. What are our chances? Evelyn asked. Garrett hesitated. Honestly, 50-50, maybe worse. Hale's got money, lawyers, and a convincing argument. We've got the law on our side. The marriage is legal, but if the judge believes it's fraudulent in intent, he can void it. And if he does, then Mrs. Thorne's debts revert to her name alone, and Hale moves forward with foreclosure proceedings on the ranch. Caleb's face went pale. Evelyn felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. 4 weeks, she said. That's all we have. That's all we have, Garrett confirmed. I'd suggest you spend that time building your case. Get witnesses. Document your relationship. Show that this marriage is genuine. After Garrett left, Evelyn and Caleb sat at the kitchen table in silence. We need a strategy, Caleb said finally. I know. Garrett said witnesses, people who can testify that we're a real couple. Who's going to do that? Half the town thinks this is a scam. Then we find the half that doesn't. Caleb stood and started pacing. Mrs. Pritchard said she'd speak for you. That's one. We need more. What about the neighbors, the other ranchers? Maybe, if we can convince them. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked harder than Evelyn had ever worked in her life. Not on the ranch, on the marriage. They visited neighboring families, bringing food, offering help, making themselves visible as a couple. They attended a barn raising on the Morrison property. They helped the Hendersons repair their fence after a storm. They showed up to every community gathering, every social event, every opportunity to be seen together. And slowly, grudgingly, people started to accept them. Not everyone, but enough. Mrs. Pritchard agreed to testify. So did 3 neighboring ranchers who'd watched Evelyn and Caleb work together. Even Mr. Henderson from the general store said he'd speak if needed. But the person who surprised Evelyn most was Sadie. It happened 2 weeks before the hearing. Evelyn was in the kitchen making bread when Sadie walked in and sat down at the table without saying anything. Evelyn glanced at her. You need something? I want to testify. Evelyn's hand stilled in the dough. What? At the hearing, I want to testify. Sadie, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I want to. Sadie's voice was steady. I've been watching you, both of you, and I know what you're doing. You're trying to save this place. For us. Evelyn didn't know what to say. I was angry when you first came here, Sadie continued. I wanted you gone. I wanted everything to go back to the way it was before Mama died. But it can't, and I know that now. Sadie, you're not my mother. You'll never be my mother, but you're not nothing either. Sadie looked up, eyes bright. You saved June when she fell. You stood up to Hale. You married my father even though you barely knew him because you wanted to protect us. And her voice cracked. I want to tell the judge that. I want to tell him that you're not some con artist. You're just a person trying to help. Evelyn's throat closed up. She wiped her floury hands on her apron and sat down across from Sadie. That means everything, she said quietly. But are you sure? Hale's lawyers are going to be brutal. They're going to ask hard questions. I don't care. I'm not letting them destroy this family without a fight. Evelyn reached across the table. Sadie hesitated. Then she took Evelyn's hand. They sat like that for a long moment, flour and grief, and something new binding them together. Thank you, Evelyn whispered. Sadie nodded, blinking back tears. Then she stood and walked away before either of them could say anything else. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray. They rode to Millstone County in near silence. Caleb, Evelyn, and Sadie in the wagon. June and Millie left at home with the Morrison family. The courthouse was larger than the one in Blackstone Ridge, built from gray stone that seemed to absorb all warmth and light. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Evelyn hadn't expected an audience, but apparently the whole county had heard about the case. Ranchers, townspeople, business owners, everyone wanted to see what would happen. Victor Hale sat at the front with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He smiled when he saw Evelyn. Garrett met them at the defense table. Are you ready? No, Evelyn said honestly. Good. Neither is Hale. That's when the real fighting starts. The judge entered, a stern-looking man named Whitmore who'd been on the bench for 30 years. He called the court to order and gestured for Hale's lawyers to begin. The first lawyer stood. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Mr. Hale purchased legitimate debts from 2 parties, Mr. Caleb Thorne and Mrs. Evelyn Mercer. Shortly after this purchase, and facing imminent foreclosure, these two individuals entered into a marriage for the sole purpose of evading debt collection. This constitutes fraud, and we ask that the marriage be declared void. He presented documents, timelines, financial records showing both debts. It looked damning. Then Garrett stood to present their defense. Your Honor, this marriage is legal in every sense. Two adults, both free to marry, chose to do so. The timing may seem convenient, but convenience doesn't equal fraud. My clients will testify that their relationship developed naturally, and that marriage was a logical step for two people building a life together. Garrett called Evelyn to the stand first. She climbed up, hands shaking, and swore to tell the truth. Garrett asked basic questions. When she'd met Caleb, why she'd accepted the job, how the relationship had developed. Evelyn answered carefully, sticking to the truth as much as possible. Then Hale's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Thorne, you were hired as a housekeeper, correct? Yes. And you married your employer less than 2 months later? Yes. How much did Mr. Thorne pay you as a housekeeper? $20 a month. And as his wife, what financial benefit do you receive now? Evelyn's jaw tightened. The same as any wife. Security, a home, and the erasure of your debts? That wasn't why I married him. Then why did you? Evelyn looked at Caleb, at Sadie sitting in the front row. Because I didn't want to lose them, she said quietly. The lawyer pounced. Them? Or the financial protection they offered? Them, the family, the home we built. In 2 months? Yes. Mrs. Thorne, isn't it true that you married Mr. Thorne specifically because you knew it would transfer your debts to his name and complicate Mr. Hale's collection efforts? No. No? I married him because I love them, Evelyn said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. All of them. The girls, the ranch, him. And I wasn't going to let Victor Hale destroy that just so he could add another property to his collection. The courtroom went silent. Hale's lawyer stared at her. Garrett looked surprised. Caleb's expression was unreadable. No further questions, the lawyer said finally. Evelyn stepped down, heart pounding. She'd just admitted feelings she hadn't even acknowledged to herself, in front of a courtroom full of people. Caleb took the stand next. He testified about hiring Evelyn, about how she'd changed the household, about the decision to marry. When asked if he loved her, he hesitated, then said yes. It sounded like the truth. Evelyn's chest tightened. Finally, Garrett called Sadie. The 15-year-old girl walked to the stand with her head high, looking older than her years. Hale's lawyer tried to dismiss her testimony as irrelevant, but Judge Whitmore allowed it. Sadie spoke clearly and without hesitation. She talked about her mother's death, about the housekeepers who'd quit, about Evelyn arriving and refusing to leave no matter what Sadie did to drive her away. She saved my sister, Sadie said. June was on the barn roof, about to fall, and Evelyn climbed up in the middle of a storm and brought her down. She could have died doing that, but she did it anyway, because that's who she is. And the marriage? Garrett asked gently. Do you believe it's genuine? I do now, Sadie said. I didn't at first. I thought it was fake, but I've watched them, and I know my father. He wouldn't marry someone he didn't care about, not even to save the ranch. Hale's lawyer stood. Miss Thorne, isn't it possible your father is simply a good actor? My father can't act, Sadie said flatly. He's the worst liar I've ever met. Several people in the courtroom laughed. Even the judge cracked a smile. No further questions, Hale's lawyer said, sitting down. After Sadie's testimony, Garrett called 3 more witnesses, ranchers who'd seen Evelyn and Caleb together, who testified to their partnership and mutual respect. Then it was Hale's turn for rebuttal. He took the stand himself, smooth and confident. Your Honor, I'm not here to challenge the character of Mr. Thorne or his new wife. I'm simply asking the court to recognize that this marriage occurred under highly suspicious circumstances. The timing, the financial motivation, the convenient legal protections, all of it points to fraud. Garrett cross-examined. Mr. Hale, how many properties have you acquired through foreclosure in the last 2 years? I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. Approximately 12. And how many of those were purchased for significantly less than market value? Hale's expression hardened. All legal transactions. I'm sure they were, but it seems you have quite the pattern yourself, Mr. Hale. Acquiring debts, pressuring families, forcing sales. Garrett held up the folder Evelyn had gathered. Would you like me to read the names of the families you've destroyed? Objection. Hale's lawyer jumped up. This is not relevant to the case at hand. It's absolutely relevant, Garrett shot back. It speaks to Mr. Hale's motivation for challenging this marriage. He's not concerned with fraud. He's concerned with losing control of another acquisition. Judge Whitmore held up his hand. That's enough, both of you. He leaned back in his chair, studying the courtroom. Then he said, I'll make my ruling in 1 week. Court adjourned. They walked out in silence. The wagon ride home felt like it took forever. When they finally reached the ranch, Evelyn went straight to her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. She'd told a courtroom full of people that she loved Caleb, and she'd meant it. Somewhere between scrubbing floors and surviving Sadie's hatred and standing up to Victor Hale, she'd fallen for this broken man and his broken family. And now she had to wait a week to find out if any of it mattered. The week that followed the hearing was the longest of Evelyn's life. She threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing pantries that didn't need organizing, baking bread no one had asked for. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Caleb buried himself in ranch work. He left before dawn and came back after dark, exhausted and covered in dirt. They barely spoke except at meal times, and even then the conversations were stilted and careful. Neither of them mentioned what had been said in the courtroom. The girls noticed the tension but didn't know what to do about it. June retreated into silence. Millie clung to Evelyn more than usual. Sadie watched everything with those sharp, knowing eyes. On the third night, Sadie cornered Evelyn in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. You meant it, didn't you? Sadie said without preamble. What you said in court. Evelyn's hand stilled over the dish she was washing. Which part? About loving us. Evelyn set down the dish carefully. Yes. Even me? After everything I did to you? Especially you. Sadie's eyes filled with tears. Why? Because you were protecting your family the only way you knew how. I can't fault you for that. I was horrible to you. You were grieving. There's a difference. Sadie wiped her eyes roughly. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Have a stepmother. I don't know what that's supposed to look like. I don't know what you want from me. Evelyn dried her hands and turned to face Sadie fully. I don't want anything from you except what you're willing to give. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But I am here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whether the judge rules for us or against us, I'm staying. Even if we lose the ranch? Even then, because this isn't about the ranch anymore, not for me. Sadie stared at her. Then what's it about? Evelyn thought about how to answer that. How to explain that somewhere between arriving at this broken house and standing in that courtroom, everything had shifted. That she'd stopped surviving and started living. That these people, this angry 15-year-old, this quiet 11-year-old, this chattering 6-year-old, this grieving man, had become more important to her than safety or security or any of the things she thought she needed. It's about family, Evelyn said finally. Real family. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. Sadie's face crumpled. She crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and threw her arms around Evelyn. Evelyn held her tight while she cried, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like 2 years of grief finally breaking loose. I miss her so much, Sadie choked out. I miss my mama so much and I don't know how to stop missing her. You don't, Evelyn said quietly. You never stop. You just learn to live with it. Does it get easier? Sometimes. And sometimes it gets harder. But you survive it either way. They stood like that for a long time, Evelyn holding this girl who'd hated her, who tried to drive her away, who was now clinging to her like she was afraid to let go. When Sadie finally pulled back, her eyes were red and swollen. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For staying, for fighting, for not giving up on us even when we gave you every reason to. Evelyn's throat tightened. You're welcome. Sadie nodded and went upstairs without another word. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, heart full and breaking at the same time. The next morning, Caleb found her in the barn feeding the horses. "We need to talk," he said. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "About what?" "About what you said in court." "Caleb, let me finish." He took a breath. "You said you loved us. All of us. Me included." Evelyn couldn't look at him. "I know what I said. Did you mean it? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Evelyn finally met his eyes. "Yes, I meant it. I didn't plan to, didn't want to, but somewhere along the way, it happened." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I meant it too. When I said I loved you." Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't marry you because I loved you," Caleb continued. "I married you because I was desperate and out of options. But living with you these past months, watching you with the girls, watching you fight for this place like it's yours, I don't know when it happened, but it did. Caleb, I know this started as a legal arrangement, a partnership, but I don't want it to stay that way." He stepped closer. "I want this to be real, if you'll have me." Evelyn stared at him, heart pounding. This man who'd been a stranger 4 months ago. This man who'd offered her a job when she had nowhere else to go. This man who'd proposed a marriage of convenience and then somehow made it something more. "I'm not easy to love," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm stubborn and difficult, and I take up too much space. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much of everything." "You're exactly enough," Caleb said. "For me, for the girls, for this place. You're exactly what we needed. We might still lose everything." "Then we lose it together." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She'd spent so many years being alone, even when Thomas was alive, being the strong one, the one who held everything together while falling apart inside. But standing here in this barn with this man looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth fighting for, something inside her finally cracked open. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes? Yes, I'll have you, really have you, not just on paper." Caleb's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. He pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't perfect. Their noses bumped. Evelyn tasted like coffee and Caleb smelled like horses. But it was real and it was theirs and it was everything. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "We're a mess," Evelyn said, laughing through her tears. "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "But we're a mess together." They stood there holding each other in the cold barn, while the horses shifted in their stalls and morning light filtered through the cracks in the walls. For the first time since the hearing, Evelyn felt something like hope. The judge's ruling came on the 7th day. A messenger arrived at noon with an official envelope. Caleb's hand shook so badly he could barely open it. Evelyn stood beside him, heart in her throat. He unfolded the paper and read silently. His expression didn't change. "Well?" Evelyn demanded. "What does it say?" Caleb looked up, eyes bright. "He ruled in our favor." Evelyn's knees went weak. "What?" "The judge ruled the marriage is legitimate. He dismissed Hale's challenge entirely." Caleb's voice cracked. "We won." Evelyn grabbed the paper and read it herself, hands shaking. Judge Whitmore had written a scathing rejection of Hale's fraud claim, stating that while the timing of the marriage was convenient, convenience alone did not constitute fraud. He noted the testimony of multiple witnesses, the evidence of a genuine partnership, and the fact that both parties had entered into the marriage freely and legally. The final line made Evelyn's throat close up. This court finds that the marriage between Caleb Thorne and Evelyn Thorne is valid in both law and spirit. The challenge is dismissed with prejudice. "We won," Evelyn whispered. "We won," Caleb repeated, louder this time. Then he grabbed Evelyn and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. The girls came running from the house at the sound of their laughter. "What happened?" Sadie demanded. "We won!" Caleb set Evelyn down. "The judge ruled for us. The marriage stands." June's face lit up. Millie started jumping up and down. Even Sadie cracked a smile. "Does this mean we get to keep the ranch?" June asked quietly. Caleb's expression sobered. "Not yet. We still owe the debt. But Hale can't use the marriage angle anymore. And with the extra time this bought us, we have a chance." "How much time?" Sadie asked. Until spring, same as before. That's 3 months. I know. The celebration dimmed slightly. They'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over. That night, Evelyn lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing. 3 months. $1,800. It was impossible. Unless... She sat up suddenly. There was one thing she hadn't tried yet, one option she'd been too proud to consider, but pride didn't pay debts. The next morning, she rode into Blackstone Ridge alone. She went straight to Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house and knocked on the door. Mrs. Pritchard answered, surprised. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" "I need to ask you something," Evelyn said. "About the families Hale destroyed. The ones in that folder." Mrs. Pritchard's expression shifted. "What about them? Do they know what he's trying to do to the Thorns? I imagine word's gotten around. Would they help? If I asked?" Mrs. Pritchard studied her. "Help how? I don't know yet, but there are 12 families who lost everything to Victor Hale. If they all came forward, if they all told their stories publicly, it might not change the debt, but it could change public opinion, make people see Hale for what he really is. That's a dangerous game, Evelyn. Hale has money and power. Those families already lost once. They might not want to risk more." "I know, but I have to try." Mrs. Pritchard was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll help you contact them, but what they do with that information is up to them." Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn wrote letters to all 12 families. She explained what Hale was doing to the Thorn Ranch. She shared the judge's ruling. She asked if they'd be willing to come forward and share their stories with the territorial newspaper. She expected silence. What she got was an avalanche. Every single family responded, some with letters, some in person, riding out to the ranch to meet her face to face. They told her stories that made her blood boil. Hale had destroyed them systematically, manipulating contracts, inflating interest rates, pressuring banks to call in loans early, all legal, all ruthless, and all of them were ready to fight back. "He took my family's farm," one woman said. "He took my sister's livelihood, but he's not taking yours, not without a fight." Evelyn compiled every story, every document, every scrap of evidence. Then she took it all to the territorial newspaper in Millstone County. The editor was a gray-haired man named Sullivan, who looked skeptical until Evelyn laid out the folder. "This is 12 families," she said, 12 properties, all acquired through foreclosure, all purchased by Victor Hale for far less than market value, all within a 2-year period. Sullivan flipped through the document slowly. "This is extensive. It's systematic. Hale isn't just a businessman. He's a predator, and people deserve to know. You understand publishing this will make you an enemy? I'm already his enemy. Might as well make it count." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll run it. Front page. Next week's edition." The article hit like a bomb. "Land baron or land thief. Local families accuse Victor Hale of systematic exploitation." Sullivan had done his job well. The piece outlined every foreclosure, every acquisition, every pattern of behavior. He interviewed the families, published their testimonies, showed the numbers that proved Hale had made a fortune off other people's suffering. The backlash was immediate. People who'd admired Hale started questioning him. Banks that had worked with him started distancing themselves. Even the territorial government began asking questions about his business practices. Hale was furious. He tried to sue the newspaper for libel, but Sullivan had documented everything carefully. The facts were indisputable. Then something unexpected happened. 3 of the families Hale had destroyed filed formal complaints with the territorial court, alleging fraud and illegal business practices. They couldn't get their land back. The sales were legal, but they could force an investigation. And suddenly, Victor Hale was playing defense. He stopped pushing for the Thorn foreclosure, not out of kindness, but because he had bigger problems. Still, the debt remained, and spring was coming fast. Quotes. In late February, Evelyn found Caleb in the barn going over the books. His expression said everything. "We're short," she said. It wasn't a question. $800 short. Even selling everything I can afford to lose, we're still $800 short. Evelyn sat down beside him. "Then we sell what we can't afford to lose. If I sell the breeding cattle, we have no herd to rebuild with. If I sell the equipment, I can't work the land. There's nothing left that doesn't cripple us permanently. They sat in silence. Then Evelyn said, "What about my house?" Caleb looked up. "What?" "My old house in Blackstone Ridge, the one Hale seized. It sold at auction for $300, but it's worth at least $800, maybe more. Hale owns it now." "I know, but what if we could force him to sell it back at market value?" "Why would he do that?" "Because the alternative is worse." Evelyn's mind was racing. All those families filed complaints. The territorial government is investigating. If we can prove he acquired my house fraudulently, if we can show he manipulated the foreclosure, he might settle just to make the problem go away. Caleb shook his head. "That's a huge gamble." "Everything we've done has been a gamble." "Evelyn, I'm not letting us lose this place because we were too scared to try." She grabbed his hand. "Let me go talk to Garrett. Let me see if there's a legal angle." Caleb squeezed her hand. "All right, try." Garrett listened to Evelyn's idea with his usual impassive expression. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "It's risky," he said. "You'd essentially be accusing Hale of fraud in the foreclosure of your property. You'd need proof. I have the timeline. I have the auction records. And I have testimony from the clerk who processed the seizure. He told me Hale had been asking about the property weeks before my husband died. That's not proof of fraud, that's just preparation. What if he pressured the bank to accelerate the foreclosure? What if he manipulated the auction to keep bids low? Can you prove that?" Evelyn thought about Mr. Henderson, about Mrs. Pritchard, about all the people in Blackstone Ridge who'd watched Hale operate for years. "I can try." Garrett nodded slowly. "Then let's try." It took another week to gather the evidence. The bank clerk who'd processed the foreclosure admitted, off the record, that Hale had visited him multiple times before Thomas's death, asking about the Mercer property. The auctioneer remembered Hale warning other potential bidders that the property had foundation problems, a lie designed to suppress bids. 2 witnesses testified that Hale had offered to buy the property directly from Evelyn before the foreclosure, for far less than it was worth, and had become angry when she refused. Garrett compiled everything into a formal complaint and filed it with the territorial court. The legal argument was simple. Hale had manipulated the foreclosure process to acquire the property below market value, which constituted fraud. The remedy they requested was equally simple: force Hale to sell the property back at fair market value, with proceeds going toward the Thorn debt. Hale fought it, but he was already under investigation for the other complaints. Adding another fraud allegation made his legal position worse. 2 weeks before the spring deadline, Hale's lawyers approached Garrett with a settlement offer. Hale would sell the Blackstone Ridge property back for $700, less than market value, but more than he'd paid. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Combined with what Caleb could raise, it would cover the debt. Evelyn and Caleb sat in Garrett's office, staring at the settlement papers. If you sign this," Garrett said, "you get the house back. Hale gets $700, and you can use that money to pay off the ranch debt." "But I lose the house again," Evelyn said, "as soon as we sell it to someone else to get the cash." "Unless you don't sell it," Caleb said quietly. Evelyn looked at him. "What?" "The house is yours. Your property. What if you hold on to it and lease it instead? Rent it out for income? That wouldn't give us the money now." "No, but I have enough to cover the rest if we sell the breeding cattle. It'll hurt. We'll spend the next 2 years rebuilding the herd, but we'd keep the ranch, and you'd keep your property." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You'd do that? Sacrifice your cattle so I can keep a house?" "It's not just a house. It's your home, where you lived with your husband, where you built a life before all this." Caleb took her hand. "I won't ask you to lose that." Evelyn stared at the settlement papers through blurred vision. The house on Birch Street. She'd lost it once already. Walked away from it carrying everything she owned in a borrowed bag. The thought of getting it back, of having something that was truly hers, was almost too much to process. "We sign it," she said finally. Garrett pushed the papers across the desk. They signed together, hands shaking. And just like that, Evelyn owned property again. They paid off the debt 3 days before the spring deadline. Caleb handed the money to the bank himself. Every dollar accounted for, every cent hard-earned. The banker counted it twice, stamped the paperwork, and handed Caleb the deed to the ranch, free and clear. No liens, no outstanding debts, no Victor Hale lurking in the shadows. Caleb stood on the courthouse steps holding that deed like it was made of gold. Evelyn stood beside him, hand in his, heart full. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did," Evelyn agreed. They rode home in silence, too exhausted and relieved to speak. When they reached the ranch, the girls were waiting on the porch. Sadie stood. "Well?" Caleb held up the deed. All three girls screamed. Millie launched herself off the porch and into Caleb's arms. June started crying. Sadie's face broke into a smile so wide it looked like it hurt. They stood in the yard holding each other, this strange patchwork family that had survived everything thrown at them. That night, they had a real celebration. Evelyn cooked a feast, roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the winter stores, and a cake that Sadie helped her bake. They ate until they couldn't move, laughing and talking and planning for the future. After the girls went to bed, Evelyn and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars. "I need to go check on the house," Evelyn said. "The one in Blackstone Ridge. Make sure it's still standing before I try to lease it." "When do you want to go?" "Tomorrow, maybe. I could ride in early, be back by evening." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What if we went together, made a day of it?" Evelyn looked at him. "You want to come with me? What?" "I want to see where you lived, who you were before you came here." He took her hand. "I want to know all of you, not just the parts you've shown me." Evelyn's chest tightened. "All right," she said. "Together." They left at dawn the next morning, the girls staying home with the Morrisons. The ride to Blackstone Ridge felt different this time. Evelyn wasn't running toward an uncertain future or escaping a shameful past. She was just going home. To a home she'd lost, and somehow gotten back. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, and they stood in front of the little wood frame building on Birch Street. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, the windows needed replacing. But it was hers. "It needs work," Evelyn said. "Most things worth having do." They walked through together. The inside was dusty and cold, empty of furniture, echoing with absence. But Evelyn could still see Thomas sitting at the kitchen table, could still smell bread baking, could still hear her own laughter from years ago when life was simpler. "This is where you lived," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "For 11 years. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Do you miss it?" Evelyn thought about that. "I miss him," she said finally. "Thomas, he was a good man. Not perfect, but good. And I loved him. I'm not trying to replace him." "I know, and you couldn't even if you tried." Evelyn turned to face Caleb. "Thomas was my first love, my first marriage, my first life. But that life ended when he died. And what I have now, what we have, that's something completely different. Is that okay?" "It's better than okay. Because I'm not the same person I was when I lived here." That Evelyn was scared and small and spent her whole life trying to take up less space. But the woman standing here now, she takes up exactly the space she needs, and she doesn't apologize for it anymore. Caleb pulled her close. "I love that woman." "Good, because you're stuck with her." They stood in the empty house holding each other, honoring the past while building something new. Before they left, Evelyn walked through one more time, saying goodbye to the ghosts. Then she locked the door and climbed back into the wagon. "Ready?" Caleb asked. "Ready." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. Spring arrived properly in April. The snow melted, the grass returned. The valley turned green and alive, buzzing with insects and birdsong. Evelyn stood in the garden planting vegetables while Millie helped by digging holes in random places. June was inside practicing her reading. Sadie had started helping Caleb with the ranch work, learning everything he could teach her. The house felt different now, not haunted by absence anymore, just full of noise and mess and arguments and laughter, full of life. One evening in late April, Caleb came in from the barn and found Evelyn making supper. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "I got a letter today," he said, "from the Morrisons. They want to buy 6 head of cattle." "That's good. It's the start of rebuilding the herd, slowly, but it's a start." Evelyn turned in his arms. We're going to be okay. Yeah, we are. Even though we're not perfect. Even though we're still figuring this out. Especially because of that. They kissed, slow and easy, interrupted by Millie running in and announcing that the chickens had escaped again. Life on the ranch was never perfect. There were still hard days. Days when money was tight and tempers were shorter. Days when Sadie's grief came back sharp and unexpected. Days when Evelyn looked in the mirror and still heard the old voices telling her she was too much, too big, too difficult. But those days were getting fewer. Because she'd learned something crucial during those brutal months of fighting for survival. She'd learned that worth wasn't determined by what other people thought. That strength wasn't about being perfect. That family wasn't just blood. It was choice and effort, and showing up even when things got hard. She'd learned that the woman everyone had thrown away could become the woman who held everything together. In June, Evelyn leased the Blackstone Ridge house to a young couple just starting out. The rent wasn't much, but it was enough to help. In July, Sadie got accepted to a teaching program in Millstone County. She'd study during the school year and help at the ranch during summers. In August, June started talking more. Real conversations, not just quiet answers. She even laughed sometimes, a sound so sweet it made Evelyn's heart ache. In September, Millie started school. She came home every day with stories and drawings and an endless supply of energy. And through it all, Evelyn and Caleb built something that looked nothing like either of their first marriages. This one was messier, harder, built on desperation and determination rather than romance. But it was real. One October evening, almost a full year after Evelyn had first arrived at the ranch, she stood on the porch watching the sunset. The valley stretched out before her, golden and green, peaceful in the fading light. Caleb came up beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. They stood in silence, shoulders touching. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked finally. "Saying yes that night? Coming here?" Evelyn thought about that courthouse in Blackstone Ridge, about sitting in the snow with nowhere to go, about climbing into a wagon with a stranger and trusting that it would somehow lead to something better. "Not once," she said. "Even with everything that happened? Hale, the hearing, almost losing everything? Especially because of all that. Because it proved something I needed to know." "What's that?" "That I'm stronger than I thought. That I can survive things I never imagined surviving. And that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments." Caleb pulled her close. "I was dying before you came here," he said quietly. "Not physically, but inside. The ranch was running, the girls were fed, but I was just going through motions, waiting for nothing. And then you showed up and everything changed. I didn't do anything special. You did everything. You brought this house back to life. You gave my daughters hope again. You gave me a reason to keep fighting." His voice cracked. "You saved us, Evelyn. All of us." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You saved me too." They stood on the porch as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Inside, the girls were setting the table for supper. Evelyn could hear them arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. It was normal, ordinary, beautiful. This was what she'd been searching for her whole life without knowing it. Not perfection, not approval, just belonging, just home. The town that had once mocked her now saw her differently. Some people still whispered, still judged, still couldn't see past their own prejudices. But others, the ones who'd watched her fight for her family, who'd seen her stand up to Hale, who'd witnessed her transform a dying house into a living home, they understood. She wasn't the widow they'd pitied anymore. She was Evelyn Thorne, wife, stepmother, fighter, the woman who'd refused to stay thrown away, and that was worth more than their approval ever could be. Years later, people would tell stories about the winter Evelyn Mercer came to the Thorne Ranch, about how she'd arrived with nothing and stayed when everyone expected her to leave, about how she'd stood up to Victor Hale when powerful men twice her size had cowered, about how she'd climbed onto a frozen roof to save a child, about how she'd fought in a courtroom not with lawyers or money, but with raw, honest truth. But Evelyn never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a woman who'd learned that survival wasn't about being perfect or pretty or small enough to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. It was about showing up, doing the work, fighting for what mattered. and refusing to apologize for taking up space in a world that had spent years trying to convince her she didn't deserve any. She'd learned that the hard way, but she'd learned it, and that made all the difference. The story could have ended with defeat, with foreclosure and failure and a family scattered to the wind. It could have been a tragedy about how poverty and prejudice destroy people who don't fit society's narrow definitions of worthy. But it didn't end that way, because Evelyn refused to let it. She'd taken a desperate situation and turned it into a fighting chance. She'd taken a legal arrangement and made it a real marriage. She'd taken a house full of grief and filled it with life again. Not through magic or miracles, through work, through choice, through the simple, stubborn act of refusing to give up. And in the end, that was the lesson. That worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you claimed for yourself. That strength didn't mean never breaking. It meant putting yourself back together and keeping going. That family wasn't about blood or perfection. It was about showing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That sometimes the woman everyone throws away becomes the woman who saves them all. Not because she's special, but because she refuses to stay down. Evelyn Thorne stood on that porch watching the stars come out, Caleb's arm around her shoulders, her daughter's voices drifting through the open window, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She'd lost everything once, been humiliated, dismissed, discarded. But she'd survived, and in surviving, she'd found something better than she'd ever imagined. She'd found herself. And no one, not Victor Hale, not the judgmental town, not the cruel voices in her own head, could ever take that away from her again. The ranch would face hard years ahead. Money would be tight. Work would be endless. There would be storms and setbacks and moments of doubt. But they'd face it together. This imperfect patchwork family. This woman who took up space unapologetically. This man who'd learned to live again. These girls who'd survived loss and learned to trust. Together, they were unstoppable. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.